There was a woman in the suburban sprawl of Carrington Hills whose name circulated through the neighborhood the way gossip travels through a crowded salon, swiftly, loudly, and with a mix of dread and exhaustion. Her name was Karen Lockwood. People didn't call her Karen in the ordinary sense. They said it with the weariness of someone who had endured one too many complaints about discount policies, HOA rules, and non-existent customer service conspiracies. Karen was the sort of person who believed the universe was designed around her needs and that anyone who disagreed simply lacked intelligence. Her personality revolved around three unwavering beliefs. Rules were flimsy suggestions meant for other people, she deserved respect simply for existing, and volume always won an argument. She had perfected the art of behaving like an expert on every subject, despite knowing very little beyond what she overheard from daytime television court shows. Shows she watched religiously while folding laundry and shouting at contestants who could not hear her. Trouble began brewing the day her neighbor, Thomas Green, gently asked if she could prevent her Pomeranian, Princess Sparkle, from digging under the shared fence. Thomas was a quiet man whose idea of excitement was successfully balancing his budget. His backyard was his sanctuary, an orderly oasis filled with tomatoes, peppers, flowers, and the aroma of earth. Unfortunately for him, Princess Sparkle viewed his garden as a personal excavation playground and had turned it into a landscape that resembled a cratered battlefield. Karen was immediately outraged, not at the destruction, but at Thomas's audacity. "You cannot control a creature's artistic expression," she declared. "She's excavating. It's natural." "She's destroying my cucumbers," Thomas replied gently, rubbing the back of his neck. "Art is destruction," she snapped, as though quoting a philosopher only she knew. The argument escalated rapidly, as it always did with Karen. She accused Thomas of emotionally targeting her dog, of attempting to sabotage her household, and at one point, of holding a personal grudge because she never attended his community events. "It was a charity potluck," Thomas said, baffled. "Exactly," Karen muttered. "Extremely suspicious." After enduring several weeks of Princess Sparkle's rogue gardening missions and Karen's explosions, Thomas finally did something drastic. He submitted their dispute to a televised arbitration court show. Not just any show. The show presided over by none other than Judge Judy Stanton, the famously sharp-tongued, unimpressed with everything matriarch of TV justice. A month later, Karen received an envelope bearing the production company's seal. The moment she opened it, her living room filled with a gasp so dramatic that her cat, Biscuit, leapt off the sofa in alarm. "They want me on that show?" Karen exclaimed. "That glorified grandmother with a gavel? That overhyped relic who thinks sarcasm counts as legal expertise?" Marla, her friend who had come over to knit and gossip, nearly dropped her yarn. "Karen, Judge Stanton is iconic." "Maybe don't, oh, please," Karen said, cutting her off with a dramatic swipe of her hand. She built an entire career on glaring at people. "If I glared at people like that, they'd call the police." Marla swallowed. "Maybe don't say that on the show." But Karen had already crafted an entire narrative in her mind. She believed she was personally invited because the show recognized her as someone with charisma, intelligence, and a level of fierce presence that average people simply could not match. She spent the next several days practicing speeches in front of her bathroom mirror. She posed with hand gestures, turned her chin upward in defiant angles, and rehearsed quotes she believed sounded legally profound. "You'll regret coming after me. You can't silence the truth. I know the law better than anyone here." Her cat watched in fatigued silence, blinking slowly as though questioning its own existence. Her delusional confidence grew so strong that she proudly informed a confused grocery store cashier, "Television justice will never be the same after I appear." The cashier only nodded and handed her the receipt. The morning she was scheduled to appear on the show, Karen emerged from her house wearing oversized sunglasses and a blazer meant to look intimidating. Instead, the entire ensemble resembled a costume from a discount detective drama. She flagged down her rideshare driver, Marco, and spent the entire trip lecturing him about how overrated courtroom celebrities were. "It's just yelling, Marco. That's all they do. I can yell better than anyone." Marco nodded politely while calculating the fastest route to the studio to end the conversation. When the car pulled up to the building, Karen exited as though she were stepping out at a movie premiere. She tossed her hair and announced loudly, "Wish me luck." Marco glanced at her and said under his breath, "Good luck to whoever has to deal with you." Inside, Karen's presence was immediately felt. The staff exchanged discreet glances. All of them had experience with difficult guests, but something about Karen radiated a special brand of chaos. Within minutes, she was complaining about the temperature, the chairs, the lighting, and the waiting time. She refused to fill out paperwork until a production assistant informed her that Judge Stanton would absolutely tear her apart if she didn't. "Let her try," Karen muttered smugly, completely unaware that multiple staff members were already whispering, "Oh no, she's going to get destroyed." When the time came for her to enter the studio courtroom, she walked in with the swagger of someone expecting applause. The audience immediately perked up at the sight of her. Karen practically glowed with dramatic energy. Thomas was already standing at the defendant's podium, offering her a polite good morning, which she responded to with a curt sniff, and then, the doors behind the bench opened. Judge Judith Stanton entered the room, and the shift in atmosphere was instant. The judge's presence filled the space with authority. The audience rose. Thomas rose. Even the bailiff stood taller. Karen remained seated. It took the bailiff leaning close and rumbling, "Stand up," for Karen to slowly, reluctantly rise, as though doing the judge a personal favor. Judge Stanton took her seat, gave the room a single sweeping glance, and her eyes landed on Karen like a hawk spotting a mouse. It was only then, only in that first unspoken moment, that a flicker of unease cracked through Karen's armor. Just a flicker, but it was enough. The stage was set, and the doom she didn't yet recognize had already begun to unfold. Karen stood behind her podium, chin raised, arms folded, confident she would outshine everyone in the room. The audience whispered among themselves, exchanging excited looks. There was something unmistakably explosive about her presence. Thomas stood calmly across from her, quietly adjusting his glasses and preparing himself for whatever unpredictable storm Karen was about to unleash. As Judge Stanton settled into her seat, she scanned the room with sharp, assessing eyes. Her attention immediately locked onto Karen, who offered a smug smile in return. "You," Judge Stanton said, her voice cool and controlled. "You are the plaintiff?" Karen nodded, launching into her rehearsed charm. "Yes, Your Honor, and might I just say, quiet," the judge snapped without looking up. Karen's expression twisted like she had just bitten into a lemon. The audience snickered softly. Judge Stanton continued marking something on her notepad, seemingly unfazed by Karen's offended posture. "This is a courtroom," she added. "Not a stage for your performance." The faint laughter from the crowd only deepened the scowl on Karen's face. Judge Stanton turned her attention to Thomas. "Mr. Green, you filed a claim that your neighbor's dog repeatedly breached your property and caused extensive garden damage. Is this correct?" Thomas nodded, speaking politely. "Yes, Your Honor. Her dog dug under the fence several times. My garden has been destroyed repeatedly. I've tried bringing it up to Ms. Lockwood, but she dismissed my concerns. Do you have evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." He produced photos showing Princess Sparkle mid-dig, surrounded by overturned soil, shredded plants, and snapped tomato vines. Judge Stanton studied the photos. "Quite the enthusiastic creature, isn't she?" Thomas responded with a weary smile. "Very." Karen immediately erupted. "Objection." Judge Stanton's brow lifted. "To what?" "That picture." Karen jabbed a finger at the photo. "She's smiling weirdly. It makes her look guilty." "Dogs do not pose for incriminating photographs, Ms. Lockwood," the judge replied. "They simply exist." Karen scoffed. "Well, I disagree." "Noted," Judge Stanton said dryly, making another mark on her notepad. "Not appreciated, but noted." Karen scowled, whispering, "This is ridiculous." "Ms. Lockwood," the judge said sharply, not even looking up, "if you continue muttering to yourself, I will assume you're trying to present closing arguments early and shut you down." Karen snapped her mouth shut. When it was her turn to speak, Karen stepped forward dramatically, planting her hands on the podium as though she were starring in a courtroom thriller. "Your Honor, this entire case is absurd," she began. "My dog is innocent. Thomas is overreacting. Frankly, he just doesn't like me because I refuse to be part of his suspicious community potluck." Thomas blinked slowly. "It was a charity event." Karen waved that off. "Exactly." Judge Stanton pinched the bridge of her nose. "Ms. Lockwood, this is not about social events. Stick to facts." "I am sticking to facts," Karen insisted. "And in my opinion," "Stop right there," the judge said. "Your opinion is not evidence." Karen's nostrils flared. Judge Stanton motioned for her to continue. "Tell me your side." "Concisely." Karen took a deep breath and launched into the speech she'd rehearsed. "Your Honor, I have been looking forward to this moment because, well, frankly, someone needs to expose the truth behind these shows and the so-called authorities running them." Thomas looked horrified. The audience leaned in to go on, Judge Stanton said, a dangerous edge in her voice. Karen puffed up like a proud rooster. "I cannot take this courtroom seriously. And truthfully, I cannot take you seriously." The room fell silent. Judge Stanton stopped writing. Thomas's eyes widened. Karen kept going, blind to the absolute disaster unfolding. "You're an overrated grandmother who became famous for yelling at people. People treat you like a legend, but I don't buy it. You're just theatrical gray hair." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. One person choked on their water. Another whispered, "Oh no, she didn't." Carter the bailiff stepped forward slightly, ready for whatever came next. Karen stood there proudly, fully convinced she had just delivered a mic drop moment worthy of a standing ovation. Judge Stanton stared at her, silent, eyes sharp as glass. Seconds passed. The tension deepened. Finally, the judge folded her hands. "Ms. Lockwood," she said quietly, "are you done humiliating yourself for the cameras?" Karen scoffed. "I'm speaking my truth." "Your truth," Judge Stanton replied, "is about to become the reason you lose this case." The audience burst into laughter. Karen's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? That's biased." "No," Judge Stanton said calmly, "that's consequences." Thomas tried to hide a smile, but the judge wasn't done. "You insult me in my courtroom. You disrespect the process. You interrupt repeatedly. And you mistake volume for intelligence. That tells me everything I need to know about your credibility." Karen sputtered helplessly, "This is all bias." "This is all you're doing," the judge replied. "And I suggest you brace yourself. I haven't even begun addressing your behavior yet." The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. The tension was electric. Even Thomas, polite and mild-mannered, couldn't stop glancing between Karen and the judge like he was watching a slow-motion disaster he couldn't look away from. Karen crossed her arms defiantly, but for the first time, her confidence wavered. She had no idea that she had just stepped into a much deeper hole, and Judge Stanton had every intention of burying her in it. Judge Stanton cleared her throat, reclaiming the room with a single sound. The murmurs quieted instantly. Even Karen, who had been bristling with agitation only moments earlier, stiffened as if sensing the shift in tone. The judge gestured for Thomas to continue presenting his evidence. Thomas handed over a meticulously organized folder containing receipts for damaged plants, replacement supplies, fencing repairs, soil enrichment products, and even a note from his gardener describing how Princess Sparkle had sprinted through the garden like a golden puffball of destruction. Judge Stanton flipped through the documents with calm, practiced efficiency. "Well prepared," she said, nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Green." She turned her gaze back to Karen, slowly, deliberately, unlike someone else in this room. Karen's expression tightened, her lips pursing into a line so thin it could have been drawn with a pencil. The first witness called was Mrs. Grayson, the elderly woman who lived across the street. Her cane tapped gently as she approached the podium, and she offered Judge Stanton a respectful nod before speaking in a thin but steady voice. "That fluffy menace from her house has been sneaking through that fence for months. Digging, running, barking, tearing up plants. Poor Thomas works so hard in his garden, and she just lets that little creature cause havoc." Karen shot to her feet. She wasn't wearing her glasses half the time. She could have mistaken a squirrel for my dog. Judge Stanton raised a single finger without even looking up. Sit. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but then, under the watchful stare of the bailiff, lowered herself into the seat, muttering curses under her breath. Next came Mr. Lutz, the neighborhood postal carrier. He spoke with an air of someone who had seen too much. I deliver mail to both of their houses. I've had to return that dog to her yard more times than I can count. She squeezes through the smallest hole, and she's fast. Once she even stole a sock from my mailbag while I wasn't looking. Karen gasped dramatically. That is a lie. Princess Sparkle would never steal anything. That bag probably smelled weird. Judge Stanton didn't bother suppressing her sigh. Ms. Lockwood, your dog is not on trial for petty theft. Please stop interrupting. Karen crossed her arms. Well, she shouldn't be slandered. Noted, the judge said. Irrelevant, but noted. Piece by piece, the narrative formed. Independent witnesses, photos, receipts, and consistent descriptions all pointed toward the same truth. Princess Sparkle had been digging under the fence repeatedly, and Karen had done nothing about it. Karen's agitation grew with each passing moment. Her foot bounced rapidly. Her fingers tapped. She shifted her weight from one hip to the other, clearly struggling to suppress the chaos inside her. She began muttering fragmented protests. This is ridiculous, they're exaggerating, targeted attack, conspiracy. Judge Stanton glanced up sharply. Ms. Lockwood, your whispering is not subtle. The microphones are picking it up. Karen flinched. Are you spying on me? No, the judge replied, sounding deeply exhausted, you're just very loud. The audience burst into laughter that finally shattered Karen's fragile patience. She shot out of her seat with a burst of energy. This is unfair. You are all ganging up on me. I am the only one telling the truth. My dog is being framed. I am being persecuted for being a strong woman with high standards. Thomas blinked. What does that have to do with gardening? Carter, the bailiff, took a single step toward Karen. It was enough. She froze mid-rant and slowly sank back into her seat, gripping the edges of the podium with white knuckles. Judge Stanton leaned back, observing her for a long moment. Ms. Lockwood, this outburst only confirms what I already suspected. Karen sat bolt upright. Which is? That you are reckless, impulsive, and incapable of taking responsibility. Qualities that make you an unreliable narrator in your own story. Karen looked outraged. Narrator? Do not interrupt, the judge said, the words slicing through the air like a blade. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Stanton folded her hands. Let me make something very clear. I have presided over countless disputes, petty, bitter, emotional, foolish, and occasionally legitimate. This one, however, has been uniquely enlightening. The audience leaned in. Even Thomas looked curious. Enlightening? Karen repeated, confused. Yes. Judge Stanton's voice grew firm. Educational, in fact. Because you, Ms. Lockwood, have provided a perfect example of the consequences of arrogance. You believe shouting makes you right. You believe confidence equals competence. You believe disrespect is a form of intelligence. Karen opened her mouth, but Judge Stanton didn't give her the chance, and worst of all, you believe rules do not apply to you. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, true unease appeared in them. Thomas looked down, hiding a small smile. Judge Stanton continued, your neighbor acted responsibly. He documented the damage. He attempted to resolve matters peacefully. He prepared evidence. You, on the other hand, insulted every person who attempted to communicate with you, including me. Karen sputtered. Well, silence. Karen swallowed hard. Judge Stanton lifted her gavel slightly. And now, Ms. Lockwood, we are going to discuss your behavior. Karen's heart thudded visibly in her throat. The judge looked directly into her eyes, unwavering. When you insult a judge in her own courtroom, believe me, the repercussions are never pleasant. A hush swept across the room. Even the audience leaned forward in breathless anticipation. Karen's defiance slipped. Her posture wilted. Her eyes darted anxiously between the judge, the bailiff, and the audience, but it was too late. She had lit the fire herself, and now she was about to feel the heat. The tension in the courtroom grew thick enough to feel. Karen sat frozen, hands clenched in her lap, staring at Judge Stanton as though waiting for a meteor to drop directly onto her head. The judge tapped her gavel lightly, not slamming it, just tapping, enough to send a small, sharp echo through the room. "Ms. Lockwood," Judge Stanton began, "you accused me of being—" She lifted the case file, reading aloud with exaggerated clarity, "an overrated grandma with a power complex." The audience shifted, some trying not to laugh. Karen shrank a little. I didn't mean," it was an emotional moment. The judge raised an eyebrow. "No. It was a foolish moment. And one you delivered proudly." Karen opened her mouth to defend herself, but Judge Stanton continued without pause, "Your behavior today has been loud, disrespectful, combative, and completely unproductive. Not once have you offered evidence, only attitude." Thomas coughed softly, trying to disguise a smile. Karen glared at him. "You think this is funny? You're all taking this way too seriously. She's blowing everything out of proportion." Judge Stanton leaned forward, voice calm but dangerous. "Ms. Lockwood, I assure you, if I were blowing anything out of proportion, you would know." Karen immediately shut her mouth. The judge continued, "This is not a playground. This is a courtroom. And your inability to understand the difference is the root of every problem we've addressed today." Karen slumped down. "This is ridiculous, let me finish." The judge's voice cut cleanly through the air. "After reviewing all evidence, witness statements, and your own spirited contributions, the decision is clear." Karen straightened, bracing herself. "Thomas Green is awarded the full cost of damages, totaling $4,300. Karen gasped as though she'd been stabbed. "For what?" "For some flowers? Plus court fees," the judge added calmly. Karen's jaw dropped so far it nearly hit the table. "You can't be serious." "I am," Stanton said. "As a heart attack. And may I remind you, each time you interrupted me today added to my resolve." Karen clutched her forehead. "This is oppression. This is favoritism. This is an abuse of—" "Stop." Karen froze mid-explosion. The judge wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her tone alone had the command of someone who had spent decades bending chaos into order. "I'm not finished," Judge Stanton said. "There will be one additional requirement." Karen blinked rapidly. "Additional requirement?" The judge turned to Thomas. "Mr. Green, does your fence currently have any reinforcement?" Thomas shook his head. "Not beyond basic wooden panels, Your Honor." The judge nodded. Then she turned back to Karen with a look that could slice steel. "You, Ms. Lockwood, will install proper reinforcement on your side of the fence. You will also attend a mandatory responsible pet ownership course." Karen slapped the table. "A class? For what? A golden retriever who just likes running around?" "For an owner," the judge corrected, "who has shown zero ability to manage her responsibilities." Laughter bubbled through the seats, though muffled out of respect. Karen's face turned red. "This is humiliating." Judge Stanton's expression softened only slightly. "No, Ms. Lockwood. This is a learning opportunity. Humiliation only comes when a person refuses to learn." Karen sank deeper into her seat, looking like a balloon slowly deflating. The judge continued, "Now, before we conclude, there is one final matter to address." Karen looked up nervously. "What now?" The judge folded her hands. "Your earlier insult." Karen swallowed. I apologized, didn't I?" "No," the judge said. "You tried to justify it." "That is not the same thing." Karen fidgeted in her chair. "Okay, fine. I'm sorry." The judge simply stared at her. Karen shifted uncomfortably. "For calling you that thing." Still, the judge didn't respond. Karen wrung her hands. "I'm sorry for being rude." The judge blinked once, unimpressed. The room stayed quiet. Finally, Karen, exhausted, defeated, and visibly regretting every choice she had made that morning, exhaled deeply and said, "I'm sorry for disrespecting you, Your Honor. I shouldn't have said what I said. It was wrong." Only then did Judge Stanton give a tiny nod. "Accepted." Karen sighed in relief. "Too soon." To be clear, the judge added, "This apology doesn't change the ruling. But it does confirm there's hope for you yet." Karen groaned, collapsing forward onto the table. Judge Stanton lifted her gavel. "Court is adjourned." A firm crack echoed through the room. Thomas shook hands with the bailiff, thanking him. Mrs. Grayson patted Thomas on the shoulder, grinning. Even Mr. Lutz gave a thumbs up before leaving to finish his mail route. Karen remained seated, staring blankly into the distance like someone whose soul had temporarily checked out. When she finally stood, Princess Sparkle, who had been waiting quietly outside with a friend, came bounding in to greet her. The fluffy golden retriever wagged her entire body with joy, knocking Karen slightly off balance. Karen sighed deeply, bending down to ruffle her dog's fur. "Well," she murmured, "at least you still love me." Princess Sparkle licked her chin enthusiastically. Karen closed her eyes. Yeah, I know." As she walked out of the courthouse with her overexcited dog trotting beside her, she muttered, "Okay, fine. Maybe I deserved it. A little." Then, after a moment of reflection, she added under her breath, "But I'm still not calling her underrated." Behind her, Judge Stanton stepped into her chambers, shaking her head and smiling slightly. She'd seen it all before: pride, denial, chaos, stubbornness, and the quiet, reluctant growth that sometimes followed. In the end, justice had been served, and Karen? She had definitely, unmistakably, unquestionably regretted her words.